Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we are talking about how there are no more short leverage, stealing retail shares, acquiring AMC, and many more in this video. First, we're taking a look at this. Remember when the cost to borrow was extremely high on AMC and GME? Once the reverse repo drops to zero, CTB will shoot up. No more cheap leverage for short sellers. We are coming up. Now, when you take a look at this, some of the things that were talked about was a borrowing cost, the liquidity concerns, and the volatility. And so obviously what you can see is that if there is a liquidity concern, this could lead to a short squeeze because many short sellers will try to cover their positions. And obviously with the volatility, it might increase the risk of a short squeeze on forced shorts to cover at higher prices. And now something that is also talked about is the reverse repos rate drop to zero or become less available? It might reflect broader changes in liquidity or funding costs. Higher borrowing costs for securities could follow. And so you can see how everything is obviously linking up, how it's one step towards another, and obviously with the ultimate goal of getting the short sellers to cover. Now, in the past, when we saw that the cost to borrow was extremely high for AMC and GME, we did see a reflection in how the price was obviously going up. And what we also saw was, again, the volatility. It was the volume going up as well. And it was also how shorts needed to increase their leverage. And so we do know, because we have seen in the past, how the cost to borrow will affect the short sellers. Now, reverse repo is what we're talking about here. And when you take a look at the reverse repo, it's at $78 billion. So we are still under the $100 billion mark. Now, this is obviously good news considering what we've just talked about. Like I said, it's not going to continuously going down. We've known and we've seen that it's obviously a up and down movement. So tomorrow it could easily be at 90 billion or even above $100 billion. But what we can see is that in terms of the overall, in terms of when you take a look at a 60-day or a 90-day average or even a 30-day average, the reverse repo is going down. And now that means good news for us, for the retail, because it means that the easy accessible liquidity for these short sellers are starting to fade away. Now, there are also other factors that contributes to the cost to borrow. We know that the reverse repo is one, but we also have many others because the cost to borrow relates with how easily they are able to get shares. And we've seen how they're able to find ways of doing this. We've talked about in the past, obviously with the countless amount of FTDs. We've talked about with, of course, the offshores. But more importantly, we've also seen how they use the crypto tokens with the tokenizations of AMC shares. And that is one of the main reasons for why the cost to borrow went from a very high amount to a low amount, because they were able to have hundreds of billions of AMC tokens, which according to some firms were backed 1-to-1, others 100-to-1. Nevertheless, they were all supposedly backed by AMC shares, which we know weren't possible, but because they said it was and regulations and financial institutions took it as such, they were able to use it and therefore lower the cost to borrow. But that, with obviously what's going on right now with more regulations, with more limitations, is obviously coming to a halt. We're still going to see these loopholes being abused, but it definitely is a good thing to see how the liquidity, again, a very big thing, to obviously go to zero. Now, when we take a look at this, and I think this is something that, again, all apes have already known this, but FINRA admitted Apex Clearing has been fined for lending your shares of stock to short sellers without your permission, without paying you properly, and without advising lent shares are ineligible for SIPC protections. AMC and GameStop holders were and right as usual. So just like we talked about earlier with how they find ways of obviously trying to locate shares, here is another way, but it's even more than that. It's about understanding how all these institutions are working together to obviously exploit the retail, because they've been fined with lending your shares without your permissions. So if you're one of the few who own 10,000, or if you're just one of the people, who just owns any shares of AMC and have tons of lend shedding, and you don't have any understandings, or at least in your understanding, your shares are only belong to you and aren't lent out, well, it could have been lent out. And so whilst you're trying to fight the short sellers, whilst you're trying to hold on to your AMC shares, the institutions have secretly lent out your shares for the short sellers to push the price of these shares down, obviously against you. So you can see how the institutions are working together. And now what's important is the fact is that they have only been paid 3.2, or rather fined 3.2 million for violations. Now the reason why I say this is because it just looks like it's a cost of business to the fact that Apex has paid FINRA 3.2 million as a way of saying, we've done this, we made a lot of money, so here's a cut of the money. Now, like I said, these consequences, these fines need to increase, because if they don't increase, it will never serve as a lesson. It will never serve as a thing of actually stopping it from happening, because retail investors who had these shares lent out, who were then faced with the consequences of using it to short against them, obviously face the price of their investments going down. And again, like we talked about, they weren't actually paid properly. And so investors are actually screwed much more. The retail investors, more precisely, were screwed much more, but yet they were only fined $3.2 million and not talked about any compensation for the retail investors. And you can also see this is in terms of how big this is, 850,000 customers. So easily, if depending on who they are, it could have been AMC shares, it could have been GME shares, obviously it could be other shares as well, but we can see how big this whole situation was, over 850,000 customers, and it's just how easily these things can be done. And so when we talk about, all of these people who have been manipulating shares, wherever it's brokers, wherever it's clearing institutions, wherever it's the financial institutions, they are all coming together right now to try and fight against the retail investors. And this really just highlights how big this situation is. The very fact they have to fight against the retail investors, who again doesn't have that much money in comparison to these big institutions, obviously shows that they are extremely over leveraged in the short positions with AMC and GME. It obviously shows that these positions are involving hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, like we talked about in the past. Now, you could say that this is fake, and just like you could have said that naked short selling wasn't real, just like you're saying that how no clearing has been doing this, that clearings would have to notify you, would have to pay you properly if they were lending out your shares. All of these things that were once deemed as impossible, as fake, that they were saying that AMC and GameStop holders are just saying this for the sake of saying it, have all turned out to be true. And so, like I said, it easily, with all the data we've gathered in the past before, could be hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, that are obviously involved in this. Now, we can also see, and this is going off of what we talked about yesterday, KBC Group NV acquired 639,000 shares of AMC. So yesterday we talked about how we're seeing institutions change their ratings on, or rather improving their ratings on AMC. And I talked about how that's a good thing to look at, but it's not something that we should really take into heart. What's more important is actually seeing whether firms are buying and holding onto their shares of AMC. And that's what we are seeing right now. And that itself is the most important factor. Whilst they could change their ratings and it does give a good sentiment about AMC, ultimately if firms are buying into AMC, it shows that they understand the potential. It shows that they realize how much money, how much profit they can make with AMC investment. It shows that they obviously understand the fundamentals of the AMC investments as well. As always, none of this ever financial advisor. Do take out a grain of salt. Make sure to do your own due diligence and research. But when we take a look at furthermore in terms of how they're manipulating AMC, you can see this. Ran across this today, reminding me of an XRT post. They literally have shorted the stuffing out of XRT, putting the ETF on the red show list. They shorted a basket of 80 companies in the ETF to target one or two. The shorts are so ducked. Now, this is referring to the shares of AMC and GME, because by shorting XRT, you're shorting them too as well. Now, just like we talked about how there's a difficulty right now with liquidity with shares of AMC and GME, one of the ways they're trying to do this is by shorting XRT. And so whilst what they're doing is obviously a way of shorting AMC, I definitely think it's ineffective, but also think it's very desperate. And it just shows how dire the situation is for the short sellers. And you guys, thanks for watching the video. I'll catch you guys next time.